Thank you so much for letting us interview you.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure. I was looking at your menu. Let me see. I know it's kind of weird if I can pull it up at the same time. Let me try to forward it to myself
Okay.
on my computer. See if I can do that. I'm not as good at technology as you guys are, probably.
Okay.
I think that worked. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Okay. So our project is just basically cooking a 10-course meal and also uploading the instructions on YouTube. So like people interested in home cooking a fancy meal can follow, like no matter their level of cooking. So
Nice.
I did some research on your LinkedIn and then I saw that you're like really experienced in managing things like the quality for food for restaurants. Are you a chef too?
Yeah. So I'm by trade. I'm more of a front of house manager, but I've always worked in the kitchen because I wanted to understand, all facets of the restaurant. And when I had my restaurant on South Broadway previously, before this, Mario's Ocean Club, I was the chef. I did all the menu and everything. And then in my current restaurant right now as well, me and my partner do the menu creation and everything. So not by education, I'm more of a hospitality manager, but just in practice over the last 30 or so years, I started cooking a lot.
Okay. So do you write the recipes for your restaurant?
Yes.
How do you come up with them?
So a lot of it is based on experience. So even though I was in the front of house, I spent a lot of time in the kitchens, whatever restaurant I was in, because I wanted to understand it, which I highly recommend. I think the best restaurateurs and restaurant managers understand how to do both, and that was always my goal. So I started off, with a local restaurant company I started off at the Stanford Park Hotel, which is local there, owned by Woodside Hotels and Resorts. And then I went to Left Bank Restaurants, which I think the French cuisine was really a great foundation for me, culinarily speaking, and with viticulture, with the wine. And I try to spend a lot of time in the kitchen with those chefs to understand the menu and how it worked. And that really gave me a strong foundation for how they created recipes, the consistency in our prep recipes, our plating guides, our recipes for creating the dish on the line for the guests. That was really the strongest foundation. And then throughout my career with Eddie V's Prime Seafood, which is more of a fine dining style restaurant, I worked a lot with the chefs as much as I could as well. And very similar, you find out when you work with a lot of different great chefs, including John Bentley, who was there locally. His restaurant's not there any longer. But, we really follow a similar format for creating prep recipes, plating guides, and all of the systems and tools, that we use to, I'm sorry, let me send that call to voicemail real quick. All the different systems and tools that we use to really create the consistency in the kitchen and in the restaurant, and to educate our cooks and our prep cooks.
Okay, so how precise are your instructions for the chefs to like keep everything consistent?
Yeah, very, very, very precise. We try to make sure that there's no margin for error, so that there is consistency, and so that there's not a whole lot of variation, or there's not that opportunity for variation. So for our prep recipes, for example, we'll do, in a restaurant setting, oftentimes your batch sizes are geared towards a certain sales volume. And when you might be busier than other times, you need to increase that batch size. So oftentimes our recipes will be for prepped items like, sauces, dressings, soups, things of that nature, mother sauces, if you will. We'll create a 1-time, 2-time, or 3-time batch size so that the recipe is adjusted for different scales. Because lots of times you don't necessarily just want to multiply a recipe by 3 across the board. It's gonna taste differently. You might need to back off certain ingredients that don't need to necessarily be doubled or tripled when you're doing a double or triple size batch. So you really want to have, I think that's the biggest challenge, is you want to systemize things, but the culinary arts are a science and an art. So you want to have a really good, consistent flavor profile. And that often is what falls on the executive chef or the chef de cuisine, depending on the style of restaurant you have and however many different levels of chefs there are in your kitchen. That person's palate really needs to taste the final product and say, okay, that flavor profile is correct. So maybe in this certain vinaigrette, when we made it 3 times as large, we didn't need to triple the lemon juice. We didn't need to triple the salt. We didn't need to triple, whatever ingredient, because we achieved the flavor profile we were looking for. And so in order for the prep cooks to understand that, you need to kind of have anticipated those different batch sizes that you're going to make, and then account for that so that you give them the specific recipes for the different sizes. I don't know if that's going to play into what you're doing for the education on that you're going to do it for one certain batch size, but definitely in a restaurant that plays a big factor.
Okay. So do you give out like surveys or whatever to your customers? So like because different people have different tastes and stuff. So do you adjust your recipes according to that, or?
We really don't. I mean, well, I shouldn't say no, but I think from a certain standpoint, particularly in a fine dining atmosphere, you're trying to present it in a certain manner, and you have the flavor profile that you're shooting for, and someone may or may not like it, and certainly you want to adjust accordingly. But I don't know. It's a really tough one. I guess you would over the long term, take in that feedback and then maybe adjust it slightly if there's a predominant, response that you're getting. But oftentimes there's just personal preferences. So maybe you want to stick to a consistent presentation, a consistent flavor profile, so that people can then, know what to expect, and then ask for something to be prepared, maybe less spicy, less salty, more salty, and that sort of thing. I think the consistency is the key, because if it changes a lot, it's very hard for people to get a baseline understanding. And then it's hard for them to order and say, oh, well, last time I wanted it less salty, but this time it seems like the chef changed the recipe. Now it's fine. I shouldn't have asked for it less salty, or whatever that case may be. But yeah, over the long term, once you run the course of a recipe and you get the feedback, if there's something that is, kind of, I guess predominantly, everyone or a majority of the people are saying it, then you would want to adjust at that point.
Okay. How do you control the quality of your ingredients? Like, for example, how long do you buy the ingredients before cooking them, and do you buy them from the same place?
Yes, definitely. So that's the biggest challenge, right? You need to understand which ingredients have a shorter shelf life than others. I'd say in a fine dining atmosphere, you really want to bring all your ingredients in probably the day before or morning of, and prepare for that shift and keep it as, starting over from scratch every day as much as possible. We'll often, in a more fine dining setting, there's our mise en place, right? Everything that's in place, all the knife cuts are done just prior to service. We're setting up our stations with all of our garnishes, all of the prepared items that would be on the cook's line. And then at the end of that shift, hopefully everything has been used or emptied, and we would discard that, and or use that to maybe feed the staff, create family meal. I think that's where family meal plays a big portion in our culture, where we are feeding each other, and we're feeding each other in such a way that we're using what might otherwise become waste to feed the staff.
So basically, your restaurant is like no waste at all. Just
Yeah, well, in my current restaurant, we try, but we don't follow that procedure. But I'd say in a fine dining setting, you would. But for us, we're a little bit more of a casual restaurant right now, the current restaurant I have. And then we do extend that. So our shelf lives are more like 2 to 3 days. It depends on what the product is, of course. Certain things don't last as long as the others. We're going through a high volume of things. So certain dressings we make might have a longer shelf life, and we'll hold on to those longer. But it really depends on the style of restaurant and what it is you're trying to do.
Okay. What is the typical structure of a 10-course meal?
So, for me, it's kind of interesting that you say, because, there's not a whole lot of restaurants that do the 10-course meals, the French Laundries of the world. The chef I worked for at Left Bank, Roland Passot, when he had La Folie in San Francisco, Manresa and Los Gatos and things like that. For me, it's more about, there's a chef I really love. His name is Dan Barber. I've still never been to one of his restaurants, but I would love to go. It's a Blue Hill Barn in New York City, in Blue Hill, I believe, off the top of my head. But it's a story you're telling. So I think, there's a couple different ways to approach it. You could be maybe telling a cultural story. Maybe there's a cultural aspect of your cuisine, something that is part of your heritage, and you're trying to take people through this journey. But there could also be a purpose-driven story of sustainability and educating your clientele on different aspects of our supply chain and how food is prepared and produced, and the respect for it from farm to table, and the aspect of how it's grown, harvested, treated, how it makes it to your plate. So for me, I think it's a matter of what kind of story you're telling, and then how everything progresses to tell that story. And it can also be geared towards a more traditional sense of, you want to start off with maybe an amuse bouche or kind of pepper in the amuse bouches between the courses, so that you have something that's a smaller one bite flavor that really tantalizes the palate, and then kind of leads you maybe from one flavor profile to the next and helps marry the courses. So you might have some more substantial courses. I don't know that I necessarily look at a 10-course meal as appetizers and entrees. I kind of look at them all as kind of smaller plates, and certainly maybe the protein-centric plates towards the end, if you will, and start off with more of the vegetables and progress from light to heavy. That's one way of doing it. You can also progress from more moderate flavors to more robust flavors, so that you're not following a very robust flavor profile with something that's lighter that you might not taste if you eat it in that order. But then there's also the gastronomy of it, of how it's digested, and how it you want someone to leave feeling well. You want them, the term restaurant comes from the restorative broth that used to be served in restaurants, and you're really a restaurateur as a restorer. So you want people to feel restored and nourished, and that's really the original point of restaurants. And so there's a way to serve courses in which the digestion and the way the food is, the body accepts the food, is more pleasant. So you might approach it from that standpoint as well, depending on the cuisine you're working with. If you have more probiotic type foods, fermented foods, things like that. But it's really hard to say there's like one way, right? There's certainly the old school manner of saying you want to start off with like your veg salads and vegetables, and work into maybe your seafood, and then work into a poultry, and then maybe work into a red meat. And that's certainly an older way of doing it. I don't know that necessarily people follow that profile anymore these days as much. And then there's also the idea of the Italian is different, right? You might fold in an antipasta and do some different things with the way that Italians work through the meal progression is different than the way the French do it. and every culture kind of has a different format. So if you're doing something that's very culturally specific, I guess you would try to follow that tradition. But if you're doing kind of a, new American, nouveau cuisine, that's kind of like, kind of take off those shackles and do what you think. But I do think you want to really consider the story you're telling, and then the way the food's going to be digested, and then the way that you'll be able to showcase the flavors in such a way that the previous course won't overpower the next course, or that you do have an amuse bouche or some sort of intermezzo that will take your palate from one flavor profile to the next without losing that, effect that you want from each course.
So it does not nice. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
But it's just like basically storytelling. But
I think so. For me, I think so. Because it's really neat, and somebody's culture could be explained to you through gastronomy in a way that's beautiful. And what's neat, I think, is that we all realize that it's like, wow, there's so many parallels between different cultures and how we discovered food and used it, on opposite sides of the planet, but somehow it's very similar, and then there's other ways of looking at it as well. That's maybe not as culturally significant, but is more about, the supply chain and how it's, how we've gone into these mono crops, and, we overdo certain things that everyone likes to eat, and we're not doing it as sustainably anymore. So maybe you want to tell a story of how you could be more sustainable. Maybe you want to showcase how you can use different parts of an animal, or how you can preserve things and eat things that are preserved, things that are pickled or fermented and things like that, so that they don't go to waste. The chef I talked about before, Dan Barber, he has this famous dish that's called rotation risotto. And what he's really trying to show is how farming has evolved, and how there was, farming one crop is really not good for the land. We then thought, oh, well, we should, let the land recover, farm another piece of land, and move to another piece of land, and then come back to it in a year, 2 or 3 years. And what he's trying to say is really what's great is to rotate what's being done on that land. So let animals graze on it, then plant something that benefits from that grazing and from what the animals have left. Then plant the next crop that makes sense. And everything you plant is actually restoring the land for the next crop. And I just thought that was a beautiful way of doing it. And I thought it was a really neat dish. And it really opens our eyes up to really how farming practices should get back to their roots and evolve in a way where we're being more sustainable and more thoughtful, really, of how we're using the land, and how we're creating the food, and then how we eat and how that affects that. Because how we eat is definitely, what the consumer buys is what drives what it is that the industry does. And if we can educate the consumer to buy things that allow us to treat the land and our product and ingredients in a more sustainable, ecological, better way for the environment, for us, our health, I think that's the end goal. And I think fine dining really moves that needle, because it's difficult to tell somebody who is just trying to feed their family on the budget they have that they should be eating a certain way. For them, it's like, I can't afford that luxury. And so I think the fine dining kind of segment of the market is really what can move things ahead. And then hopefully it trickles down over time to hopefully changing the entire, supply chain of food, and how we eat and how we produce our food.
We read Dan Barber's book, The Third Plate,
Did you?
English class. Yeah. And he talked about how like the fish pond, like if it's like natural, if you let the birds eat the fish, it actually is like more healthy than just
Right.
the fish like concentrated and stuff. Yeah. So yeah, sustainable.
Yeah, seafood is I mean, I one of my last restaurant was a seafood restaurant, and I love it. And it's just really telling. I'm not sure if that's the book where he mentions how, oysters used to be abundant in New York, and then the industrial waste ruined the waters where the oysters were. And the irony of it is by planting oysters that unfortunately you can't eat, but oysters do clean the water. So if you do plant the oysters there over time, the oysters will make the water healthy again. and then hopefully the oysters can be harvested from there, that would be healthy to eat. And I think he's made some progress, or New York has made some progress, and I think he's one of the people that's moving it forward. And it's really interesting. But it goes into so many things. The salmon runs through America that have been unfortunately ruined because of the way we've dammed all the rivers so that we can live places we want to live and develop homes where we want to develop them. That's really affected how the salmon runs and the abundance of salmon. And it's something that we love to eat and probably overeat. But just the ramifications are you can't foresee, like, the unintended consequences of some of the things we've done that have ruined our foods. Hopefully we can reverse those effects and get back to keeping those things in mind and being more thoughtful about what we do.
Thank you. And
Of course.
how does the body accept food? Like, you talked about how, like, we should, like, use fermented stuff first. And
yeah, definitely. I mean, this is something I'm learning more about, and I certainly am no a doctor or nutritionist, and I don't have as much expertise in the area as some do, of course. But I do know that we need to be mindful of that. There's I think the American consumer for a time was just about abundance and maybe eating things that were just in too high a quantity, where just the portioning alone would benefit our health as a society. And then a lot of the things we tried to do, which was feed the masses inexpensively, really caused us to use a lot of preservatives, a lot of products that might extend the shelf life, a lot of things that might make it easier to produce things quicker. And those things are really have deteriorated the nutritional value of the food we eat, and then also added things that have caused us to not be as healthy. And unfortunately, in many cases, perhaps it's been added to food in order for the food to be more addicting. And that's not great either, the chemical dependencies we develop. And so we want to get back to a more wholesome way of eating, I think, to where our food is more digestible. I'm getting on but there's a raw dairy, I think near you in Monterey County, and the name eludes me, but there's only 2 dairies in the United States that have a license to produce raw whole milk the way it was, straight from the cow, and not processed, not fermented, not homogenized. And what they've found is that many people that believe they're lactose intolerant cannot drink a milk that has gone through the processes that most of our milk goes through, but they can drink a raw whole milk and they won't have that reaction. I'm not saying that applies to everybody, but there's a lot of people that do not react to bread that's made from freshly milled ancient whole grains that have not been processed. They actually don't have the intolerance to those breads like they do to the bread off the shelf, and they believe they have celiac or gluten intolerance, but really they don't. It's a lot of people have developed reactions to the things that we've done that aren't as wholesome to the foods we're eating. And if we can get back to that wholesome production of food, I think we'd find that there's a lot less conditions out there, really. And that alone, I think, speaks to how the body will handle things that are actually wholesome versus things that have been highly processed with a lot of additives and preservatives and GMOs and chemicals that just don't belong in food. But from that standpoint as well, I do think that there is something about probiotics and gut health and fermented foods and things that will help us digest eating food in a certain order. There's an Italian kind of custom that you don't mix dairy with fish, and then they felt that it doesn't get digested well, and you shouldn't be doing that. There might be some truth to that. There's different ways of looking at it, and I think some of it's cultural again, and some of it is scientifically proven. And I haven't delved into that as much as I could to speak intelligently about that. But but that is something that we should all be mindful of and understand, and how we eat and how our bodies treat the food and what's good for our bodies and what isn't.
Okay. How do you balance each meal or like course? Is there like a ratio between protein and carbs and etc.?
I don't personally. I think we try to make it. I don't think every course necessarily needs a protein or a carb. I think we try to. It depends on the dish, I guess, and if there is if it is a dish that's well known, I think you can kind of refer back to the, what what the traditional dishes you're making. Certainly in fine dining, you're usually, kind of deconstructing or putting a spin on or reinventing a dish. But I would say that you kind of want there to be, I think you want it to be balanced in an almost even manner for me. I mean, certainly in amuse bouche, you want to be able to put, it's a one bite taste. So you need to have everything like that can fit on, say a tablespoon or something, where you can just eat a bite and get the full flavors. And maybe that's more of one note dish. So you might not have a whole lot of components to it. But then some of the more substantial courses, if you do have the starch, the protein, the vegetable, I do think you want it to kind of be even, where it's maybe an ounce of each, and it really balances out well. Because, for me, I think the point of those foods is you kind of want to have a little bit in each bite, for the most part. You might be, creating a dish where you want to taste this first and then that and the next thing. But, in a fine dining setting, I think maybe, if you're going to do it that way, you could have maybe separated those components into different courses to begin with.
Okay. Okay, so what do you think about like our dishes? Like, is it okay if it's like structured like that? Would the taste like flow good? And what can we improve of like it?
Let me pull it up real quick. My screensaver went on my lock screen. Yeah, so I like it. I think there are some things here that like I've never done before, which is awesome. I think it's always neat because I think you have maybe some little molecular gastronomy going on here.
Mm,
Are you serving like caviar, or are you making the vinegar caviar?
we're making it.
That's pretty cool. I've
Yeah.
never done anything like that before. So, I think that's awesome. Like I just haven't in my career, gotten into that side of cooking, but I know that it's popular. I love to eat it. I think it's so cool to see something when you it looks like one thing, but it tastes like something else.
Mm.
And that's really also telling a story and showcasing, a technique, or a process, that is doing it. I think that's what fine dining, also is if it's something that you could make yourself at home, then maybe you made it so perfectly that it's amazing, and simplicity is awesome, and really I love that. But also something that is highly technical that the average person probably could not do is really cool as well. I like the way you're playing. I feel like with the textures, the tapioca pearls, the vinegar caviar, and you're kind of using things like that a lot that have different textural components, because the mouthfeel really goes a long way, in the uniqueness of a dish versus another. Maybe against the crispy pork belly, where the gel is just going to kind of coat it a little bit more, versus the course with the vinegar caviar or with the tapioca pearls. I think it's fun, and I think you're playing with a lot of great flavors. I like the fact that you're using pork a lot, because I think that speaks to sustainability and how you don't have to, how you can use more of the animal, how you can use things in many different ways, how you can reduce waste by preparing things in many different ways. So I like the fact that you have the pork belly, and you're creating it in different cooking techniques with the braising and even the bacon. Are you making the bacon from the pork belly yourself, slicing it and everything, or?
No, just like we're buying it from the farmers market, where they are like, I think they're doing like organic farming.
Sure. Well, I mean, and even, and that's still great, but it still speaks to, it could have been, right, or that sort of story that you're telling, where you can use many different parts of the pork in such a way that we're not wasting. I think we can't just eat salmon fillets and boneless, skinless chicken breasts. There's going to be a lot of waste around the animals if we don't branch out and utilize them in different ways. And then the cure, bacon will last longer because it's cured, or if it's not cured, it's it's been prepared in a certain way where it will naturally be preserved longer than a fresh cut of beef or a pork tenderloin, for example, or something like that. So I do like that. I like the glass noodles, again, another textural component. So my only thing is I would look at, and because I haven't had some of these things, I think it's really cool. Just the flow of your proteins. I'm not sure the salmon crispy rice, I think, precedes the pork belly really well. And then you get back into a little bit of more pork. And then you go into the prawns. So I don't know if I might look at putting the prawns higher up in your courses there. I'm not sure if that's more of a portion size thing or how, but these dishes better than I do. So I would just look at that from a progression and just think about that progression and think if that is the way you want it to progress and how you want people to eat it and the story you're telling. I don't want to tell you how to do it because cooking is an intimate thing. Your hands have been on these dishes and you know them better than anybody. I would just be confident in your assessment of it, but do consider those things of how something is going to taste after something and how the flavors are going to go from one to the next. But I'd like to eat this.
Okay.
I'm really curious about the yuzu reverse spherification.
Yeah, that's gastronomy again.
Right. So that'd be pretty cool. I'd love to see some photos if you take them. That'd be great.
Okay, we're like for the prawn sauce and like the glass noodles thing, we're thinking because like there are two main courses. If they follow each other, would that be too much? So like in the middle we serve that.
I see.
But does like if it's like it doesn't flow well, would it go like before or after the salmon or?
Right. I don't know. So yeah, so for me, I guess I look at it as far as like what defines a main course versus like not a main course, right? Is it the portion size or how are you using that?
We're giving them rice, and I think it's just carbs. Like for the
Gotcha.
main one, we're giving them rice, and for main course 2, we're giving them udon.
Okay, so you're more complete, protein, starch, vegetable, and that would define more of your main course versus the appetizer. Yeah, I mean, I think anything, the execution it would be what it comes down to, right? If you want to kind of keep your main courses grouped, then that works. So you have 2 main courses, and then is the glass noodles in between considered more of a? Trying to figure out. Or are those 3 main courses?
The glass noodle is like, how when we put dried noodles into oil, they would just like expand and become crispy.
Sure.
We want to do that. This is like
crispy. No, right. But you're considering that more of an appetizer or kind of an intermezzo, like between those 2 main courses.
Like giving them a break between.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that works. I see where you're going with that. No, I like that. Then I think that does work nicely. Yeah, I think you've thought it out well. I think it works.
Okay, so
I like how you have tapioca kind of capping, the beginning and the ending, and then one of the things is like when you have this many courses, what ties it back, and do you forget? And then so you're kind of like bringing them back, and they might have like a connection between the 2, and that helps kind of like tie the whole meal together. which I think is smart. This is good.
It's good.
I want to try it.
We'll send you pictures and the YouTube links.
Sounds great.
Okay, so thank you so much for your help. We learned a
Oh,
lot.
you're welcome. Have fun. That's the biggest thing, right? Every dish needs a little fun and a little love.
Yeah. Thank you.
You got it. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.